10/31/2023, our Daily Bread Feed My Sheep series. And today, as always, we'll be reading and exhorting from the King James Version of the Bible. Trying to catch my breath here. Been a busy day. We do our midweek miracle sermon on today. But let's see what we have here out of Scripture. Esther, the book of Esther, chapter 9, verse 1. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. Only thing about this series is I pop the Bible open and I read from wherever I open up. And since we're in Esther chapter 9, if you've never read Esther, a whole lot of stuff happens from chapter 1 to chapter 9. And there's a lot of stuff you won't be able to really understand that has happened just coming in at chapter 9. But nevertheless, let us read. Verse 2 in chapter 9. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Assyria to lay hands on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all the people. Let me give you a quick summary of the story. Basically, the enemies of God people, had sought to kill God's people. And they tricked the king into making a decree to destroy God's people. But there's a lady by the name of Esther who got put in position to be the king's new bride. After the old bride vastly disobeyed the king, it wouldn't come. He sought a new queen, and that's how Esther got put in place. So God will put you in the place you need to be used to help not just your people, but all people. So she appealed to the king. The king said, I can't change what I wrote about the people that's about to attack your people, but what I can do is make another decree saying they can defend themselves. And that's where we pretty much, it's more to it than this. Read it for yourself if you've never read it. In today's terms, basically helping you understand that God said he would never leave us nor forsake us, and he was going to always give us a way out. So the Jews gathered themselves together in the cities, and if you don't know, the Jews are God's people, gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. Verse 3, and all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the deputies and officers and the king helped the Jews. So the Jews even got help, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. Mordecai being the uncle of Esther, who was very instrumental in this whole thing. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. God favored him as he favored Esther. Verse 5, thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. Verse 6, chapter 9 of Esther. And in Shushan, the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And in Parshadatha, and Dolphin, and Apatha, and Poratha, that's why I said, these names, Adalia, and Aratatha, and Paramastha, man. Verse 9 and verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman of the Hamathas, the enemy of the Jews, slay they. But on the spoil lay they not their hands. Excuse me. Verse 11. Read it for yourself. Them hard names. On the day the number of those that were slain in Shushan, the palace, was brought before the king. And don't give me that. That's why I don't read the King James Version, because names are hard to pronounce. Because there are foreigners in Florida here, and I see them with name tags at Walmart, and I'm like, how do you say your name? So don't try and make it a Bible or King James King James thing, because there are names in 2023 that people have that are hard to understand and pronounce. So don't try and say, well, that's why I don't. Nah, that ain't gonna do with it. Verse 12. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee, or what is the request further? And it shall be done. That's how much favor she had gained with the king by doing what God had called her to do. If you have to read the story from the beginning, because she was just a virgin girl. He was collecting other virgins to choose him a new wife. And Esther had another, whose name was Hadassah. Esther had enough sense to go to the king's eunuch and to ask the king's eunuch, what does the king like? And she gained wisdom from the council. I share this with single women who want to get married. I said, stop fixing yourself up like you want to look, and ask God, what does your husband need to see you, how he needs to see you. I've talked to a lot of women who's been single for 20 and 30 years, ain't never been married. And I've shared prophetically with them the reason your husband don't recognize you, or they say they're waiting on their Boaz. The reason why he don't recognize you is because you're not seeking God on how you're supposed to show yourself, on how you're supposed to look, on how you're supposed to carry yourself. You're just doing what you want to do. That's why you're by yourself. Some, and most of them, don't receive it. Oh, you don't know what you're talking to. Okay, you still single. Going on 50 and 60 years old, been wanting a husband for 20 and 30 years, but you won't gain wisdom or counsel from somebody who talks to God concerning these things, or who simply understands the Bible. Because from studies, it was the king was going to choose from close to 400 virgins, and he chose her. So make yourself wonder, why was she special, other than the fact that God's hand was upon her life? But the Bible still reveals things that Esther did to gain favor with the king. And so often I share, like I said, with single women who wants a husband, I was like, this is why you can't get a husband. You too set in your ways. And we're supposed to be living for God, all of us, men and women. We do things according to the scripture, and the favor of God will be upon us. Verse 12 or 13. Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. Once again, the story is too long for me to go into the whole thing. Haman was a person who tricked the king into making a decree to kill the Jews in the first place. And so what's unfortunate about Haman's kids and his family is that not just Haman got destroyed, that his whole family got destroyed. And the very thing Haman had created to kill the Jews and Mordecai on ended up killing him. Verse 14, and the king commanded it so be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were at Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hands. Simply said, family, if I was MC Hammer, the rapper, I could understand why he wrote the song Can't Touch This. Because we as believers got to understand that God got us in the palm of his hand. And as long as we're willing to obey and do what God has called and created us to do, can't touch this. We untouchable. God bless you.